Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Traffic Mobility Review Board. Before we begin, let me hand it over to Paige Graves, MTA's General Counsel, for some important meeting information. Ms. Graves.
Thank you. Good afternoon. In accordance with New York Open Meetings Law, this meeting is open to the public and the media. In addition, this meeting is being live streamed by MTA and will be available on the MTA website and YouTube channel. Today's meeting does not include a public comment period. I will remind all who are attending today's meeting to please adhere to MTA's Code of Conduct and Decorum. These guidelines can be found on mta.info and are posted outside this meeting room. We will now play the safety announcement.
Your safety is of the foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen and adhere to the following instructions. If you witness an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room and call 911 immediately. Please follow any audible instructions provided through the public address system or visually on screens in the event of an emergency. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell B down the hallway past the elevators. If you have a mobility disability or cannot self-evacuate, please proceed to stairwell D or E for assistance by MTA staff or emergency personnel. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. If you need assistance during an evacuation, please tell an MTA staff member or emergency personnel. Thank you and have a safe day.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carl Weisbrod. I am the chair of the Traffic Mobility Review Board. I am a former chairman of the New York City Planning Commission and director of the city's Department of City Planning. The Traffic Mobility Review Board was established pursuant to the 2019 MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act to make recommendations to the board of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, an affiliate of the MTA, regarding toll amounts as well as potential credits, exemptions, and discounts to implement congestion pricing in New York City in the area south of 60th Street in Manhattan. We, members of the TMRB, have asked Juliet Michelson, to my right, at this initial meeting to describe today the major issues that we will be addressing in forthcoming meetings. Juliet has been seconded to our board as the TMRB special advisor to support us, in essence, to become our staff as we seek to understand and evaluate the options that we have to address. But first, let me ask each of my colleagues to briefly introduce themselves, starting on my left with Mr. John Banks.
Thank you, Carl. My name is John Banks. I'm the President Emeritus of the Real Estate Board of New York.
And John Durso.
Good afternoon. My name is John Durso. I am the president of the Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO.
And John Samuelson.
John Samuelson, president of the Transport Workers Union of America.
And Ms. Elizabeth Velez.
Good afternoon. Elizabeth Velez, president and principal of Velez Organization.
And to my right, Kathy Wild.
Catherine Wild, I'm president and CEO of the Partnership for New York City.
Sorry.
And finally, Ms. Michelson, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Juliet Michelson, typically Deputy Chief of External Relations at MTA, but for this project, seconded as Special Advisor to the TMRB.
And we're joined today by resources from the MTA. And Ms. Michelson, will you please introduce the people from the MTA who are with us today?
I'll jump in and do that.
Okay.
I'm John McCarthy. I'm Chief of External Relations at the MTA. Across from me is
Quamel Arroyo, who is the Chief Accessibility Officer at the MTA and a Special Advisor. To Mr. Arroyo's left is Dr. Allison C. Desereno, who is the Chief Operating Officer of MTA Bridges and Tunnels and also the lead on congestion pricing program. To Allison's left is Michael Wojnar, who's the Senior Advisor for Innovation and Policy, and Michael has worked on the congestion pricing program. To Michael's left is Will Carey, the Assistant Commissioner for Policy at New York City Department of Transportation. To my left is Tim Mulligan, the Chief Development Officer at for the capital program. He's responsible for the capital program at the MTA. And to the left of Tim, you've already met, is Paige Graves, our General Counsel here at the MTA. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now we've asked Juliet Michelson to give us an overview of the congestion pricing program before we open it up for questions. I believe there's quite a bit of material to get through, so I ask everyone on the board, all of my colleagues, to hold their questions until the end of the presentation so we're sure to get through all of it. Ms. Michelson, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
And welcome to our side of the table here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you to all of you members of the TMRB for participating in this historic effort to launch the first congestion pricing program in the United States. We're happy to have you here. So in our presentation today, we're going to quickly review why New York is moving forward with congestion pricing. We're going to talk about the goals of the TMRB generally, as well as get into some of the specific recommendations that the TMRB will be responsible for making. And finally, we'll have time for questions. Okay, so what do we know? We know that congestion is bad, and we know that it's gotten a lot worse in the last 10 to 15 years. The pandemic might have put things on pause for some time, but traffic is back at slower speeds than ever, 7 miles an hour in the CBD, 5 miles an hour in Midtown. That traffic causes air pollution. The CBD has particularly poor air quality. More vehicles means more crashes. More traffic means slower ambulances, police cars, fire trucks. It takes longer to respond to emergencies. It also takes longer for people to get to work. Folks get stuck on their bus, in a paratransit vehicle, or simply in their car. And ultimately, congestion costs workers and businesses because sitting in traffic is just not an effective use of time. We also know that the best way to manage congestion is through pricing. We know that because several cities around the world now charge drivers to enter their downtown. And in every one of those cities, without exception, that toll reduced traffic. In every case, the improvement was both immediate and sustained over time. Here in the US, many places use a different form of congestion pricing. They don't call it that. But in 11 states, there are highway lanes that drivers pay to use because they are guaranteed faster travel speeds. That's a form of congestion pricing. So it's in light of this information that in 2019, New York State mandated that the MTA Bridges and Tunnels, MTA Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, establish a congestion pricing program here in New York. The program was primarily designed to reduce traffic and improve air quality, but another important benefit of the program will be to generate revenue to invest in transit infrastructure. More specifically, that law requires that vehicles traveling to and from the CBD will be charged a toll. The CBD is defined as Manhattan south of and inclusive of 60th Street, excluding some roadways on the periphery, indicated here in purple. And the law also called for the creation of this Traffic Mobility Review Board to develop and recommend a tolling structure for approval by the MTA board. So it's important to remember that the toll will only apply to those driving into the CBD, which is ultimately a small share of the region's residents or even of the region's workers. Only 143,000 people drive into the CBD for work, That's 11% of all of those who work in the CBD and only 1% of all workers in the region. The vast, vast majority of people who work in the CBD take transit to get there. That's 1.3 million people take a bus, a train, or a subway to get to the CBD for work. So over the last couple of years, this project has gone through one of the most rigorous environmental assessment processes in NEPA history. 4,800 pages of analysis. I think John has a copy of the EA, the environmental assessment right there. An unprecedented level of community engagement. Project sponsors heard from nearly 1,000 speakers. They responded to more than 22,000 individual written comments and 55,000 form letter submissions. They held dozens of meetings, many of which were focused on environmental justice communities, low-income communities, communities of color. And through that work, they identified a number of ways to mitigate any potential effect that could come about with congestion pricing. They are in total committing more than $200 million over 5 years to, for example, reduce the impact of the toll on low-income drivers with a New York State tax credit and a discount on the CBD toll itself, to clean up some significant sources of air pollution in the Bronx, improve incentive to transition to cleaner trucks. Those are just a few of the examples of the measures that have been committed to as part of the environmental assessment process. And with these measures, just last month, the federal government found that congestion pricing in New York would reduce congestion, improve air quality, and generate resources to improve transit without significant impact on the environment. And just to take a moment, what we have seen in other cities is that congestion pricing leads to fewer cars, less congestion, faster ambulances, fire trucks, police, faster bus and paratransit. And for those who do drive into the CBD, congestion pricing will cost them money, but they will also get a better product. They will get a faster and more reliable trip. Fewer vehicles will also mean less pollution, cleaner air, fewer crashes, safer streets, and just generally better health outcomes overall. Congestion pricing will raise $15 billion to fund the MTA, or part of the MTA 2020 to 24 capital program. That money will be used to make dozens of stations ADA accessible, to buy hundreds of all-electric buses, new train cars, new subway cars. It will be used to expand the network, improve service, all critical investments for the millions of people who use transit every day. New York drivers waste more than 100 hours a year stuck in traffic. Any improvement to that will increase productivity, lower costs for businesses, improve quality of life. That is what we are here for. So we are now ready to move to the next phase of the project, which is setting the toll. So the charge of the TMRB is to develop a tolling structure that reduces traffic congestion in the CBD, generates sufficient revenue to fund $15 billion for transit improvements within the parameters set by the law, and of course, considering the environmental assessment. Your recommendation will go to the MTA board for their approval. Let's do a bit of level setting first. The last traffic survey conducted by New York City DOT was in 2018. We're in the process of updating it. But at that time, almost 9 in 10 vehicles in the CBD were cars. A large share of those were taxis and FHVs, certainly, but there were also a large number of personal cars. 5% of all vehicles were commercial vans, just about 4% were trucks, and another 4% buses. And although those shares are small, the large size of those vehicles create its own share of traffic issues. A few guide rails. The tolling structure you recommend should include different rates for different types of vehicles and for different times of day. It must also exempt emergency vehicles and vehicles transporting people with disabilities. What defines those vehicles is on the right. It should provide a discount of at least 50% in the overnight hours. It should not charge more than 1 toll per day to passenger vehicles, New York City taxis, and FHVs. That was an environmental justice commitment made as part of the EA. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And it should give a 25% discount to low-income drivers after the first 10 trips in any given calendar month. The TMRB also has the ability to recommend a tolling structure for taxis and FHVs. So the TMRB will need to make recommendation in 7 areas that together will set the toll structure. We're going to go into these in a moment, but before that, let's keep a few big principles in mind. First off, at the risk of stating the obvious, for the program to succeed, it has got to reduce traffic in the CBD. So your aim is to keep the toll low while still meeting those goals, as well as the other mandates of the program, including the revenue target. Number 3, because the congestion toll pricing program has an overall revenue target, keep in mind that every discount and exemption, every time we give some drivers a break on the CBD toll, that will increase the toll rate for everybody else. Generally speaking, higher toll rates encourage more people to avoid the CBD and the CBD toll. And lastly, the toll structure that the TMRB recommends should be within the limits of what was included in the environmental assessment to minimize any reevaluation by the federal government. Okay, so let's get into it. First, discounts by time of day. The law requires an overnight discount. We've talked about that. Beyond that, you can recommend any discount for any time period. So what we'll need a recommendation from you on are what time periods should the standard rate apply? What time periods should the overnight rate apply? Would it be helpful to have a third time period, somewhere in between the standard and the overnight, that could be used to smooth out traffic, to prevent a rush of drivers just before the overnight rate ends and the standard rate begins? And of course, what would the discounts be for each of these time periods? A few things to note. Those overnight discounts help to shift truck traffic away from daytime hours to nighttime. They also help to reduce the need to drive around Manhattan, to avoid Manhattan and the CBD toll at night when congestion is lower. Separately, overnight discounts also provide some relief to passenger car drivers who have fewer transit options at those times. A little bit of data to help inform your decision. If you look at the number of vehicles entering and leaving the CBD by hour, shown here in orange and in yellow, you can see in gray how the total traffic volume increases quickly all morning until midday, and then slowly decreases over the course of the afternoon. It really takes until 9 or 10 p.m. to get back to those pre-6 a.m. traffic volumes. Alternatively, you could look at travel speeds, because ultimately that's how most people experience congestion. Here, what's interesting is that speeds, you'll see here on the chart, that speeds on weekdays and weekends are not all that different. Traffic builds up a little later in the mornings on weekends, but for the most part, weekends and weekdays are similarly congested. Okay, second recommendation. whether to provide a discount, what we technically call a crossing credit, for drivers already paying a toll to enter the CBD. There are 4 tolled tunnels with direct access to Manhattan below 60th Street. Drivers can also enter the CBD for free on 4 bridges and multiple entries along 60th Street. In terms of how many vehicles enter the CBD at each one of those points, what we see here is that each of the tunnels and bridges carries somewhere between 5% and 9% of all vehicles that come into the CBD. 43% of all vehicles enter the CBD crossing 60th Street. So the question for this group, again, is whether to reduce the rate of the CBD toll, whether to provide a so-called crossing credit for those who are already paying a toll to cross the East River or the Hudson River. And if so, what is that discount? Things to keep in mind. Crossing credits would help reduce the toll shopping that occurs today between paid entries and free entries. Because crossing credits would charge a reduced CBD toll to hundreds of thousands of vehicles, however, that would require the overall CBD toll rate to increase for everyone else. Higher toll rates lead to more traffic being diverted around the CBD to avoid paying the CBD toll, including through some EJ communities. And lastly, crossing credits affect what share of the toll revenue is borne by drivers from each of the states. Okay, so to help explain this, let's consider first a scenario in which vehicles entering the CBD via one of the tunnels are not given any discount on the CBD toll. So they would be paying the existing tunnel toll and the CBD toll. In that case, the disparity in cost between the different entry points remains the same as it is today. The CBD base toll stays low overall because everybody is paying it. The total toll revenue paid by drivers of each state is in rough proportion to the number of vehicles from each state. On the other extreme, where tunnel drivers are given a steep discount on the CBD toll, in fact, the discount could be so significant that drivers would not pay much more, or conceivably not anything more, than they already pay today. In this scenario, the disparity between what it costs to enter the CBD at different points would be eliminated or close to eliminated. But because hundreds of thousands of drivers would essentially not be paying the CBD toll, that would significantly increase the toll for everybody else. Lastly, with a large discount on the toll for those entering by tunnel, New Jersey drivers would pay only 11% of all the CBD toll revenue, even though they make up roughly 21% of vehicles entering the CBD. So a disparity there. Okay, buses. We group buses into 5 types: publicly owned transit buses, privately owned buses that operate under contract with the government to provide public transportation services, school buses, intercity and regional buses, and other private use buses, including sightseeing. So, are there certain types of buses that should be exempt or discounted? Of the ones that still have to pay, are they paying the same rate as passenger vehicles, or should they pay a higher rate? And should buses be charged once a day or every time they enter the CBD zone? And this may be obvious, but it's worth noting that public transportation buses, whether local or regional, have an important transit function for residents and workers in the region. All right, moving right along. Trucks. The cameras we'll be using For this program, we'll be able to differentiate between small, non-articulated trucks, shown here on the left. Think moving vans, grocery delivery trucks, and larger articulated trucks where a tractor unit is carrying one or more semi-trailers. Questions for the TMRB are, should trucks pay a different rate from cars? Should large trucks pay more than small trucks? And should they be charged once or every time they enter the CBD? A few things to note. It's virtually universal practice to charge trucks more than cars. They occupy more space, they're more polluting, they cause more wear and tear on roads. The environmental assessment found that higher truck tolls encourage more truck drivers to avoid the CBD if they can, which would lead to more truck traffic outside the CBD. And as we talked about earlier, the overnight discount can help shift some daytime truck traffic to overnight when there is less congestion. Number 5 out of 7. Toll rates for government-owned vehicles. So many government agencies own large fleets of vehicles in the region, including the MTA. Those vehicles come in 3 flavors. Specialized utility vehicles, think garbage trucks, snowplows, street sweepers, etc. Garbage trucks that are designed to perform a specific public function. Vans and trucks that are used to transport goods. And lastly, vehicles that might be used to transport personnel to and from work sites. So questions for this board are there certain types of government vehicles that should be exempt from the toll or receive some sort of discount? Again, as we mentioned on the last slide, some vehicles are critical to the ability to do public works. A toll, in other words, would not modify their travel patterns, while others are used more for convenience. Next up, taxis and for-hire vehicles. This is what we're talking about: yellow taxis, green cabs, black cars, liveries, limousines, and what we call app-based for-hire vehicles, what most people call Uber and Lyft. Okay, so here you should know, as we talked about before, that the congestion pricing law explicitly calls for the creation of a tolling structure for taxis and FHVs. That's what we're asking the TMRB for a recommendation on. Do keep in mind that one of the outcomes of the environmental assessment, as we talked about earlier, was a commitment not to charge New York City taxi and FHV drivers more than 1 toll a day. That's how the project made sure that the toll would not have an adverse effect on the EJ subpopulation of drivers in the taxi and FHV industry. That said, the EA also found that tolling structures that limited taxi and FHV tolls to 1 per day resulted in additional mileage by taxis and FHVs in the CBD, as much as 5% more. As you likely know from reading the news, Uber and Lyft have both suggested that the TMRB consider a per-ride surcharge that would be paid for by customers instead of a daily toll paid for by the drivers or the company. That would not be unlike the congestion pricing surcharge, the congestion surcharge that taxi and FHV customers have been paying since 2019 for trips below 96th Street. It is within the power of the TMRB to consider such a charge as long as it does not result in New York City taxi or FHV drivers paying more than once a day or in a loss of jobs. Lastly, the law allows the TMRB to consider other discounts and exemptions as necessary. And yes, project partners did receive thousands of requests for exemptions and discounts. Here on this slide, you won't be able to read it, but we will provide you a printed copy in a larger font. Here on this slide are 122 different categories of requests. And importantly, project partners also received many, many comments explicitly asking the congestion pricing not to offer discounts or exemptions to different types of vehicles. Those are listed here. There are 55 different categories. That was a lot. Thank you for allowing us to give you this presentation. These are complicated issues. And we thank you for your attention and commitment to this effort, and we'll now be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Juliet. I just have 4 questions, sort of 2 observations. I think they're accurate observations. One is that among the 122 requests for exemptions and the 55, I think, requests for no discounts or exemptions, I assume there's an overlap, that there are, on the 55 are requests for very specific no exemptions, and on the 122 requests for exemptions on those very same things.
Yes, yes, in many cases, that is the case.
And my second, I think, observation, which you didn't say, but I think is the case, is that these 7 categories it can't be entirely viewed in isolation, because a decision on each one necessarily affects some or all of the others. Is that
That's
fair?
correct. That is one of the reasons this project is so complicated.
With that, I will start the questioning and turn it over to first questioner to my left, John Banks.
Thank you, Carl. Excuse me. And this may seem like a very simplistic question, but I think it needs to be asked nonetheless. Can you articulate what's the most effective way to ensure the lowest congestion price on the broadest group of commuters?
Yes, my role in this, we had agreed ahead, was that I was going to
Yes.
direct
Please,
answers
yes.
to...
Please direct
so-
your questions to Juliet. She'll farm them out to the appropriate person, the
Yes,
MTA.
thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to queue up Allison to answer this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet, and thank you to the members of the board. Very much appreciate your taking the time to be here and to do this difficult task. So the most effective way to ensure the lowest toll, in essence, really is to give the fewest exemptions, discounts, or crossing credits. As Juliet pointed out in the presentation, everything is balanced. And so for everything, every discount, exemption, or crossing credit that is provided, everyone else who continues to drive in must make up that difference, because in addition to reducing congestion, we also have the requirement as part of the purpose of the project to raise sufficient net revenues of $15 billion to support MTA's capital program. And so as you do the calculations, everyone else needs to have a higher toll to cover those costs.
Thank you. And as a follow-up to that, is it not, in fact, that everybody who is not exempted subsidizes those who have exemptions, and therefore people who drive their cars to work in the morning, if they're not exempted, would in fact be subsidizing buses or whomever we might decide to exempt outside of that passenger vehicle?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
John Durso.
Juliet, thank you. So how does the MTA plan to use the money specifically that they're raising through congestion pricing? And how will that translate into increased trains, buses, subways? And how will that affect or enhance the consumers' concerns regarding safety on the system?
Great question. Tim, do you want to take that?
Sure. The $15 billion revenue goes into the 2024 capital program And it's a significant funding source, well over a quarter of that. And it's directed at projects for subways and buses, as well as the commuter railroads. And those projects expand capacity, increase reliability, make the system more accessible, and, sort of address the environment with security programs that add cameras and other environmental resiliency projects that make the system safer. So all of those projects in a different way, including signal modelization, new cars, ADA stations, electrification of our bus fleet with 500 new electric buses. All of those sort of address providing options to bring more riders back, both riders that are impacted by congestion pricing, but also some of the ridership we lost during the COVID pandemic. Because having a more reliable and expanded service capacity, and two of the biggest projects that will be beneficiaries are, 4 new stations in the Bronx to bring Metro North Station into Penn Access, as well as capacity project for the subways with the second phase of Second Avenue Subway, which will be launched under this plan as well.
I do have a follow-up to that.
Okay.
Okay. So, part of my question was regarding safety, which was not addressed, and two, also the Long Island Railroad was not addressed in that. And then, as part of this second part, time frame, because right now we're talking about and instituting the congested pricing. All right, how long will it take for you to gear up for all of this when we need to have everybody to get out of their cars sooner rather than later?
So in terms of your security, I did mention camera program. Those programs apply to the subways as well as the commuter rail system, which do enhance safety. Also, Long Island Railroad has a number of ADA stations that are in this project that will be made ADA accessible. In fact, every remaining Long Island Railroad station that's inaccessible will either be moved forward towards design or construction to be made accessible in this program. We are, well into the program, but we will continue to award the projects, and we've ramped back up our commitments to historic levels. So we're awarding more work and getting more of this work mobilized than ever in the MTA's history before. So some of these projects will be launched, that will be launched in the next couple of years, won't be done immediately, because there's duration of projects are different. But the capacity that exists in the system is more than enough to absorb the additional ridership that the environmental assessment projected for the impact of congestion pricing. So, these benefits and improvements will come online in series as the projects are completed and more stations are made accessible, and more equipment that's past its useful life is replaced with new equipment. But that improvement will continue for several years into the future.
Thank you.
I'd like John to jump in.
Thanks. So two things. One on the capital investment side, a lot of the work that's been done on Long Island already will really be able to be realized when more rolling stock is added. This program, that rolling stock will be paid for through congestion pricing proceeds. So that's critically important. One of the last areas where we're struggling with on Long Island Railroad is Jamaica. People call it Jamaica Crawl. So there's a project called Jamaica Capacity Improvements. It's a really critical fix. That's also part of our capital program. And then on the safety side, just more broadly, once we get outside of the capital investments, I just want to be clear that one of the things when we go out and survey folks about coming back to the system, riding, there is always high in that list of concerns is public safety. I just want to assure this board that and many of you are aware of this, the investments that we, along with the governor and mayor, are making in safety, the cops care, and cameras program that was announced last year, which is adding on top of our 10,000 cameras. And you see it on the nightly news where they're putting out images. Those are images of people who have committed a crime or are on our system. We get those images pretty quickly. On the police officers added into the system, it's making a difference. Crime this year is down year to date. So, and then on the care side, that's obviously with the clinicians being added to deal with the mental health issues that we all see on our subway system. So that is being attacked. We are dealing with that in addition to the capital, but that is on the operating side. Thanks.
John Samuelson.
Yeah, hey. So one is an observation, and the other one is kind of more of an observation as well. You have the window as 12 to 4, the window of relief at night, the window of reduced pop, so to speak. And that's a window that is not helping folks that head into the city, blue-collar New Yorkers, as I would say, or I guess New Jersey as well, and maybe Connecticut. It's not helping the folks that make New York City go on the overnight at all. It doesn't reflect the shift work that working New Yorkers do. Shift work is usually 10 at night to 6 in the morning, or 11 at night to 7 in the morning, or 12 to 8. There's nothing about that little window, that 4-hour window, that actually gives any benefit to the working people, again, that make New York go. So it's got to be addressed. It's not helping anybody. It's got to be addressed in such a way that it's not an 8-hour window. It's got to be an hour on each end of a tour. And unless there's a way to think about that, that helps shift workers actually not get hit with such a burden. And then just the other piece on low-income drivers, and this idea that we're trying to change driver behavior. And I'm curious about whether there's any kind of cross-referencing that has been done or can be done between low-income New Yorkers and where they're coming from, and if they're coming from anything that could be described as a transit desert. Because if they are, there's no way to change driver behavior, especially for low-income New Yorkers, if they're coming from a place where there's actually no transit capacity to get them into the city. So you're not going to change transit. You're not going to change the behavior, right? And then on top of not even if somebody wanted to comply and somebody wanted to do to involve themselves in, say, greening New York City and get onto public transit, if there's no capacity, they can't do it. And now all of a sudden they're going to get hit with a double whammy. They're going to get hit with a never before seen really significant charge, even if they're getting a 25% discount. So, and I think that there are several conundrums, what I would call conundrums, involved in this, and they have to be well thought out. I mean, low-income drivers that are barely making it as it is, and they have no transit option, are going to get hit with this, and there has to be a way around that. We have to think that out. And I know as we go on, it's going to be a subject of interest for me as we continue, particularly if the idea here is to change driver behavior. And I think it relates to the broader question about improving service, not overall service, but improving transit service in a way that's targeted to relieve those that want to get out of their cars and don't necessarily have a transit option, which is the reason why many people drive to the city to begin with.
Right. I mean.
So, please. So, Juliet, are there people who can address, obviously these are issues that we're going to have to grapple with, and the question is who at the MTA can at least tell us how these issues might be addressed.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to talk about the provisions that are in the program at the moment to accommodate low-income drivers, and also talk about sort of the numbers that we're talking about here?
Sure. As you know, there are 89% of the people who work in the CBD and live outside of it are using transit today, leaving about 10% who drive in. The numbers on those who are low income, the disparity is even greater. I don't have the exact figures here. And as I think was mentioned in the slides, and you know, I think as well, is there are two provisions for low income drivers. One is for those who might live inside the CBD, who have a refundable tax credit for the tolls that they might incur. And then for those outside of the CBD, there is a program that was included in the environmental assessment, giving folks who frequently commute into the zone a 25% discount after their 10th trip into the CBD.
And Allison, do you want to talk about the shift?
Can I just
Please.
respond?
Sure, of
If
course.
there's low-income drivers inside the CBD where there's plenty of transit options, why are there low-income drivers that anybody would be super concerned about inside the CBD where there are plenty of transit options?
Let me just say, we know that there is at least a statutory constraint on that we have by statute. There is households in the CBD with incomes under $60,000 are entitled to apply for credit. Now, how we address that.
But there's really significant differences between anybody who lives inside the CBD with transit options and particularly low-income New Yorkers that live in transit deserts with no transit option whatsoever, and looking at the potential discounts that we're going to apply to those folks that have no option and not a whole lot of dough in their pocket either.
I think Allison. So,
Yeah, so on the question you raised regarding the shift workers, and as you mentioned, there are lots of different shifts. You raised several of the shifts that are more like typical 8-hour shifts. There are also people working 12-hour shifts, especially in the medical field, and they don't necessarily work consecutive either. So it is something that we continue to look at as we're thinking about where things might go. Again, one of the challenges, right now we do have the 50% reduction in the overnight, as you said, from 12 to 4 a.m., as Juliet pointed out. If we shift that, right, and you start to add hours on either side, again, what happens is you have to look at the fact that won't just be for shift workers, that will be for anybody coming at those times of day. And once you do that, then you're trying to balance again. What do we do about the cost? But more importantly, especially as you approach the 6 a.m., the 7 a.m., the 8 a.m. periods, as Juliet's graph showed or the chart showed, those are already high congestion periods. And the overall purpose of the project, the most fundamental purpose of the project, is in fact to reduce congestion. So as we go forward, if the TMRB wants some more information, we can certainly work some of that out to show.
I think you're clearly hearing that we do need more information and much more analysis on both the driver side and the shift side, the hour side. And again, Juliet, that's an area that we will need to get not only more, but I think finer analysis on.
And also an understanding of when a vehicle is charged. So if that shift, by way of example, if you're working a 4 to 2 in the morning shift and you're leaving the zone at 2, when is it that you're getting charged? It might be that you're charged at the time that it's a low discounted charge. So
Just charge at the lesser rate.
Yeah, well,
Charge at
yeah.
the lesser rate.
We're not going to solve this here today, but this is an area clearly that requires a lot more analysis. Elizabeth Velez.
Thank you, Chair. Juliet, one of the charts that you provided indicated that FHV and taxis comprise 53% on average of the congestion during the CBD. As best as we can determine at this time, have the FHV and taxi levels resumed back to pre-pandemic levels?
Right, things have changed since 2018. Will, do you want to talk about what DOT knows?
Thank you, Juliet. Thank you, Board. In terms of the landscape of taxis and FHVs, app-based FHVs, which the city calls high-volume FHVs, currently provide over 7 million monthly trips that start and or pass through the Manhattan CBD. And this compares to about 2.5 million trips by yellow taxis. And since the pandemic, the high-volume FHV industry has recovered better than the taxi industry, with FHVs reaching 96% of their 2090 trip levels by October of last year, while taxis are only at 48% of their pre-pandemic traffic levels.
Thank you for that.
Actually, can I just get a clarification of that? Is that all FHV trips, or is that trips within the CBD or the
The
congestion zone?
96%, Carl, is trips within the CBD. The percentage is slightly lower citywide.
Thank you.
And then another question that I have is, do the FHV companies themselves currently directly pay any charges for congestion pricing, the congestion pricing charges that came in 2019, or are those charges borne by the passengers?
The current fees that I think you're referring to, the $2.50 per trip
Yes.
fee on yellow taxis, the $2.75 fee on high-volume FHVs. There are also additional fees that apply to yellow taxis. Those fees are passed on to the customer.
And then as a follow-up to that, could the proposed once-a-day charge as conceived in the TMRB or the congestion pricing scenario, could that charge be borne by the companies or the passengers or the drivers? That's a decision that's made by whom?
So, I think it would really depend. It could end up being borne by the drivers. The companies could bear it, or it could be passed on. And an easier way to make sure that it is the passengers who pay would be to do a fee structure similar to what was put in place in 2019.
Thank you. Kathy Wild.
So, would any vehicle with a commercial plate be treated or tolled as a truck, as opposed to a passenger vehicle which has the one toll a day rule?
Only passenger vehicles would be limited to 1 toll per day. Commercial vans, if they're registered as commercial vehicles, could theoretically be charged more than once a day if that is the recommendation of this group.
So if it's commercial plate, it's basically a truck?
It could still be charged the auto rate if it's a small enough van. Do you want to jump in, Allison, and provide more technical?
The system will be able to distinguish between passenger vehicles that are registered as passenger and commercial vehicles that are registered as commercial. As to only, from the legislation, only passenger vehicles must be charged once per day. If the TMRB wants to make a recommendation on other types of commercial vehicles, whether they're commercial vans or trucks or other vehicles being charged more frequently or once per day, either of those options is open as a recommendation.
Thank you. And a question on, related to, 2 other questions related to other vehicles. Would the utility trucks responding, or utility vehicles responding to an emergency, would they be, under the state law, treated, are they emergency vehicles for purposes of tolls or not?
Allison, do you want to take that one too? Allison usually has the answers.
Thank you. Under the legislation, they would not be excluded from the toll as emergency vehicles. Again, that's something that would be something that the TMRB could discuss and potentially make recommendations.
Can you describe what vehicles are treated as emergency vehicles?
Yeah, there's, in short form, and I'll have to come back to you on the actual, the law that has it in there. The law that the Mobility Act, which is what created the Central Business District Tolling Program and mandated the formation of this board, points back to the other laws for the definitions. And so each of the different types of vehicles have definitions. But some examples would be ambulances. Blood delivery vehicles are included in there. There are certain types of, we have fire vehicles would be included in there as examples. And then there are a number of others that are specifically identified.
And those are all government vehicles, or does that include nonprofit as well?
It depends on which type of vehicle. So in certain cases, for example, ambulances, they're called ambulances, and the way the definition flows, it doesn't necessarily have to be just public, but in other cases, it would be specifically public.
And then just finally, another question, which is probably for Will. The DOT has had a pilot project with night deliveries, and I wondered what are the findings at this point, or any status of the night delivery program, and how does that, what does that suggest about how the pricing might affect night deliveries?
Thank you for the question, Kathy. New York City DOT runs an off-hour delivery program. This started as a pilot and was expanded citywide in 2019. The program provides technical assistance and financial assistance to businesses to encourage them to shift deliveries to the evening and overnight when there is less traffic and there is significantly less demand for curb space. Currently, there are 350 businesses enrolled in the program that encompass 1,100 locations, many of them in the CBD. An evaluation of the pilot program found that program participants benefited from reduced travel times, on average 17-minute reduction in the travel times for the vehicles making the deliveries, labor savings of up to $9.47 an hour, and lower greenhouse gas emissions from less idling and faster travel. So we've recently secured funding and will be rolling out these incentives to help businesses with the costs, the one-time costs associated with transitioning to overnight, which we find to be effective.
So your conclusion is that that suggests that we may get positive response from the, if you will, incentives of encouraging trucks to come in at night?
Yes.
Thank you. I have questions about crossing credits. You presented two stark options, really. One, no discount whatsoever, which is in our discretion, or a large discount, even a full discount. I assume we have the ability to recommend something within that spectrum, not
Sure.
one or the
There are
other.
shades of gray. Yep.
So, just to see if I understand this correctly, if the more credit crossings, crossing credits, or higher crossing credits, or any crossing credits that we recommended would help, if I understand it, reduce bridge shopping on the East River crossings. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And on the other hand, a full credit crossing, if it was provided, would mean that vehicles using the Holland and Lincoln Tunnel would in effect be paying no congestion charge, conceivably.
As well as the tunnels on the East River.
As well as tunnels on the East River. So if that was the case, at least with respect to the Holland and Lincoln Tunnel, it would have no effect on reducing traffic coming from the west. Is that true?
There would not be a pricing incentive to change travel behavior.
Do we know how much, if we gave a full crossing credit, do we know the potential cost of that and how much it would raise the base fare?
So as Allison mentioned earlier, all of these decisions are interconnected, but do we have a more
Let's assume everything else,
specific- is the same.
stayed the same, if we gave a full crossing credit, do we know how much that would increase the base fare in dollars?
Allison, you want to take that?
All of our modeling at this point has worked in other types of policy decisions, so we would have to come back to you on the specific if you added nothing else in, and what it would do when you increase it. What we do know from what we've done thus far, as you try to back it out, that it definitely by far is the one that increases it the most compared to other types of things, because there are just so many more vehicles. But to get the exact dollars, we'd have to come back to you.
Okay, because it seems to me that from what you're saying, of all the levers that we're using here, credit crossings, at least in terms of both generating the necessary revenue, but also in terms of limiting or changing congestion, crossing credits is the lever that has the most impact. And so I think we really do need an analysis from you and how that would play out in a variety of scenarios with all these other levers that we're also having to deal with at the same time. And then a final question on credit crossings. Have we assumed that the credit crossing would be, if we had one at all, would be the same for all kinds of vehicles? I mean, as you indicated, Juliet, it is normal to charge more for tolling for trucks, charge more for buses in some instances. Do we know what would happen if we charge differently on credit crossings for passenger vehicles and other forms of vehicles?
So the modeling that we did previously did have different crossing credits for different kinds of vehicles. And so
Different credit crossings?
different crossing credits, yeah. They were, in essence, as the toll was higher, the crossing credit was also higher. And so, yes, you can use different crossing credits, and depending upon how low or high they are, has a change in what we would consider the net or effective toll. And it's that effective toll that then creates the different kinds of traffic diversions that we saw in the modeling. So we would need to work it out depending upon what the recommendations are, what all the policy decisions are, to what the ultimate tolls were. And then you could look at if the TMRB were inclined, could then look at what those crossing credits would do.
Thank you. Go ahead, ask a question.
I'm sorry, I know that we're running, but I got it because I'm listening to this, and it's like my neck is vibrating here. So regarding what John Samuelson was talking about for the overnight credits, I spent a lot of years working 4 to 12 and 11 to 7 shifts, not making a hell of a lot of money. If I'm working those shifts and I get hit twice, once when I come in and once when I go home, and I wasn't making $60,000 a year or $50,000 a year then, that's taking money out of my kid's mouth or paying my rent. We got to figure something out. John is 100% right in what he's talking about. I lived it for years. So I know that you put an explanation in, Allison, but with all due respect, if you didn't live it, you can't understand what it does to you when you're pinching pennies. So we have to figure something out.
I think, if I understand John Durso's question, and not only supplementing what John Samuelson said, but raising the question of, since passenger vehicles can only be charged once a day, what a day is. And if it's someone comes in at 8 o'clock at night and leaves at 4 o'clock in the morning, is that a separate day? Is it the same day? And how does that get addressed? And that's just a whole other area that we would ask you to address. Kathy, did you?
Just to the same, also to the point about the transit deserts. One thing that wasn't clear in your presentation, Tim, is that is there going to be a serious look at where the concentrations of people that would be affected most, lower income people that would be affected most by being in a transit desert? Is there a consideration of using some of the toll money to amend the capital plan to address those specific situations? So it's because we're obviously, the more exemptions we get, the lower the tolls we're going to get. If we're not giving exemptions, can we at least make sure that people have a transit option? In London, when they introduced congestion pricing, the first thing they did was install new bus routes and buy extra buses for those locations where people did not have a viable option.
Yeah, let me respond, but Q may have some comments as well. You know, a significant portion of the capital plan is going into bus investments. When we talk about transit deserts, you know, we're talking about places where the subway system doesn't run. The bus system is far more extensive and reaches much closer to the residents of New York City. So significant investment in depots. We just awarded a complete new Jamaica depot in an EJ community. Also the massive investment that we're making in electric buses. So, you know, we received a federal grant. We're pursuing the purchase of 470. We already got some pilot electric buses. So the bus system is a major beneficiary of the capital program. There's also going to be depot upgrades that are necessary to facilitate the charging and the running of that electric fleet. So there absolutely is going to be particular bus investments. And you're absolutely right that the way the capital plan is operated, it allows for us to have the flexibility to, when specific needs are identified, make amendments and make changes that direct money towards those efforts or towards those services.
Well, that was really my question, particularly in terms of timing, because sometimes it takes a very long time for capital improvements to be made. In fact, usually. And are there shorter-term solutions where we see that there's a clear problem?
So some of the capital improvements that Tim mentioned take a long time. Some of them have been in motion for some time, including the ADA projects that have been coming online in the last few years that have been, well, you could talk to this better than me, but that have helped folks who previously maybe would have found taking the subway daunting have, you know, better alternatives. So, Q, do you want to talk to that?
Sure. I'd also like to address the Commissioner's question specifically about transit deserts. And again, we do have an express bus system and a bus system that covers the entire area here in the 5 boroughs. In addition to that, our paratransit system moves New Yorkers all across the 5 boroughs from one end to the other. And that's a system that's only getting better, especially when this project goes into place. One of the main aims of congestion pricing is to reduce congestion in the streets so that those paratransit trips are shorter, more direct, and faster for both drivers and riders of that system that carries them all throughout the 5 boroughs. But as Juliette was saying, the current capital plan already has been installing more elevators in the existing systems at a rate more than the last 3 capital plans combined. We've been delivering enhanced accessibility and will continue to do so with this money from congestion pricing to help us reach our complete goal in this current capital plan of upgrading 70 stations and making those all accessible to all New Yorkers. So absolutely, a lot of those questions that you have are going to be addressed in this capital plan.
Juliet? Excuse me, if I might, I have 2 quick points I want to follow up on, both what Carl had said with regard to the crossing credits. Can a similar analysis be conducted and presented to us with regard to the various vehicle types discussed in the EA? So if we were to exempt all buses, however we define buses, what's the revenue impact on the overall 1.5 billion per year, or $15 billion over the 10 years, and also what's the impact on, excuse me, on the congestion price for everybody else who is not exempt. That's something I'd be interested in looking at. And to follow up on what John D. said, and Tim, this might be you, is within the capital plan, and I don't remember this, are we finished with signal replacement in the system yet? And if not, will funds be available from this program to address the signal issues and positive train control, which, as you know, has the benefit of more throughput that helps us with dwell times and other types of customer-centric experience?
No, we are not through. We have more active CBTC projects going on now than ever before in the MTA's history. But there's additional lines in this plan and beyond that are going to have the benefit of computerized train control. And you're right, it has both a capacity benefit because it allows you to run more frequent service with shorter headways, but it also has a reliability benefit and it allows the system to recover more quickly. And so both of those are benefits of the CBTC and the PTC system for the commuter railroads.
Thank you.
Is anyone who has any urgent questions?
Well, I just want to make an observation. On what Kathy Wild said about the capital money and bus service, because the response, I think, twice has been that the money's being used to buy electric buses, which is all good and well. But unless the electric buses, the 470 that you referenced, is being added on top of the existing fleet, that's not going to create new bus service. It's not. And this is all going into the capital budget. This is not, you need operating money to put bus service out. So it's good and well, we're replacing diesel buses with electric buses, but that's not new service. That's replacing existing buses with electric buses. It doesn't put new service out. So that's not an answer to Kathy's question. It means we'll have new buses, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a good thing, replacing diesel with electric buses, but it doesn't create new service, and I just want to be clear about that.
Noted.
Can I ask John to talk about the bus network redesign efforts?
Well, sure. It's just in addition to the additional service that we would put on at any time. We're already in the midst of, we put the Bronx bus redesign on. We've gotten great feedback from the public as far as shorter travel time. It makes a lot more sense. We're doing the same thing in Queens. We're going to go to Brooklyn. We did it on Staten Island Express buses already. So all these things are done in anticipation of this coming into place, and it includes more service in more places, and that's certainly the case on the buses. So, and again, these buses are running overnight, and as Q said, a lot of times when we talk about transit deserts, we're really talking about subway deserts. We have a bus system that hits the 5 boroughs, and it's pretty robust. So, but understood, John. We'll always look at more service as it's needed. But to the capacity question, we have capacity, and we have capacity on the subways. We had a board meeting here earlier, and we're talking about ridership returning, but it's still well below, and it's closer to 80% than 100%. So the capacity is there, because that is an important point that's been made by you and others about the ability to move these folks.
Look,
John, last point.
When you talk about
Okay.
capacity, I understand you have capacity in the system, but when we're talking about driving people out of their cars and changing behavior, you need targeted capacity. Some of the capacity they added is on the G line. Folks on the G line are not driving into the city. We need targeted capacity increases. That's what we need.
Yeah,
So,
understood.
and also,
Understood.
express bus service is not, it's not 24-hour day service. It's not. It's express bus service that's going to bring people into the city.
Yeah,
so I appreciate all your answers.
Yeah, but part
I
of
do.
the targeted capacity, when you look at bus redesigns, it's targeting a bus system that makes sense for today and not yesterday, and we'll have to do the same thing going forward. We totally get that.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Obviously, we have a lot more to both have the MTA staff analyze here. We've only, I think, begun to scratch the surface, and a lot of issues regarding the specifics, I think, of the capital program and how it adds to capacity and meets the needs of reducing congestion and filling the needs for, particularly for those outside of the central business district. I'd like to thank the members of the TMRB, Juliet Michelson specifically, and the MTA staff for participating today. We will be reconvening in the near future for further discussions at a date we will announce soon. And the MTA, I think, has a lot of work to do. Thank you very much. So, on behalf, thank you. On behalf of the TMRB and the MTA, I would like to thank members of the public for attending. And if there's no other business, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.